Špela Pune and Špela Kranjc, Slovenia. And second opposition, Simon Grabrovec, Slovenia, and Jake Mini, United States of America. Now I would like to present 7 judges which will, who will adjudicate this final round. These are Anja Šerc from Slovenia, Marjan Nenadić from the Netherlands, Sam Nelson from the United States, Branka Lisimo from Serbia, Jan Greenland from South Korea. He's from Hong Kong. And now the right one from South Korea, J Jarvis. And the last judge, Lo Quing Phat from Singapore. I wish you pleasant evenings and enjoy the debate. I call upon the chairman, Sam Greenland, to open the final debate.
Thank you very much. Welcome to this grand final debate. This is the culmination of, as was mentioned, a week of excellent debates, and we have 4 thoroughly deserving teams here in the final, and we're all looking forward to an excellent debate. Without any further ado, I feel we should get started. Speeches will be 7 minutes in length. After 1 minute, you will hear a noise like this. Could it be a bit of a louder noise?
I cannot, because it is...
Oh, because the TV is on.
Clap loudly.
Or something. Or some kind of loud noise. Listen out for it. After 6 minutes, you will hear the same kind of noise again. And after 7 minutes, you'll hear the sound twice, like this. Okay? After that point, you should finish your speech as quickly as possible. Are there any questions before we begin? Then, on the topic, this House believes that the UN should replace the USA in Iraq. Have I got that right? Good. I call upon the first speaker, Filip Popovic, to open the debate.
Is to have stability in Iraq. We will propose the plan which will lead to this stability, and I will prove you that in the conclusion that this kind of stability has been achieved. There was no proof that there are certain terrorists in Iraq before the US-led invasion. There was no proof. After the invasion, a group of terrorists are building up their cells and are killing Americans. Americans are easy targets for them. They don't have to travel to USA or to any other country to find many Americans. They have their moving targets right ahead of them. What I would like to add here is America has taken over Iraq in quite an efficient way. It didn't take much long. But on the long run, America cannot provide stability. Cannot provide stability because, as we see, the numbers of victims are growing each month, each day, all the weeks. So all in all, America cannot provide stability. No. And that's why we are proposing a plan. We are proposing a plan that UN peacekeeping troops will replace American troops in Iraq, but America will bear the costs of these troops. Why we think that is feasible? Firstly, United States are in favor when they pretty much like the option when their troops don't have to be in foreign conflicts, when they don't have to fight. Why is that so? Because it's a pressure on the government. It's a pressure on the government when each day in the media you saw American coffins coming home. That means opposition from the party which does not have a power at the moment that the government case in America failed. That these troops are getting killed and nothing is going to be better. So, no thank you. So on that point, we propose that the UN peacekeeping troops will take control and Americans will bear the cost. You have certain nations in the states like Bangladesh and Pakistan, and these states own quite many soldiers, and they are willing to send them if you pay the expenses of these soldiers. So that's why we think it's feasible. Yes, Primo.
It's not feasible because they will not be able to provide 200,000 troops that will be needed to replace all the American troops there in Iraq.
Thank you. That's what is also part of our proposal. It's going to be gradual. It will not take overnight. So, these change troops, it will take some time. No, thank you, Jake. It will take some time, but all in all, what we think it would help. And why would it help? First, neutrality of United Nations. You have two views. One view is on Americans. They are the aggressors, they invaded us. On the other hand, you have an image of UN, which is generally perceived in all these third world countries, probably, as peacekeeper, as an organization which is international, which is legitimate, and which is bringing stability. On the other hand, United States will demonstrate its responsibility. Yes, there are many casualties occurring. We don't want, and we don't have so many reserves, but we can provide United Nations with enough soldiers to go there and to guard and to provide stability. On the other hand, support of local population for the UN will get higher as the image of UN is higher in comparison with America. Americans morally disappointed many of Iraqis by Abu Ghraib, by lying them, you have weapons of mass destruction and there are no weapons of mass destruction. So, ladies and gentlemen, examples. It happened that America, they can overtake the country well, they have a good high-tech technique, so they can bomb the country and take over the country. That happened on Balkans. They bombed some part of Balkans, and what they did, they provided, or they let UN to take control. And that meant stability. You have a KFOR forces, which are stabilizing the situation. On the other hand, you have an example, Haiti. US invasion to overthrow the dictator of Haiti in 90s. They invaded, they overthrew the dictator, and they led it to United Nations, to UN peacekeeping. Why? Because UN peacekeeping have legitimacy, have neutrality, they are not perceived as an aggressor. Yes?
Why would the U.S. give legitimacy to an action it's declared as an illegal invasion of another nation?
Well, on that very point, also the overthrowing of the dictator in Haiti wasn't approved by the UN, but when the United States showed the will, and this case is quite similar, this case is quite similar, that they would like to demonstrate their responsibility, that they care for the future of Iraq. Because I'm quite sure, also Kofi Annan told it, well, it's illegal action. He takes care what is going to happen, and if stability is the goal, that's the way we should go. Let me conclude. What this side of the table wants to prove is that we have to achieve stability in Iraq by replacing US troops for UN peacekeeping troops. As we have mentioned, USA will bear the costs of these troops, and the government of the United Nations is quite in favor of rather paying the soldiers to fight and go somewhere, than on the other hand having their own soldiers being killed each day, and that is what they can see in the media, and they are posed by the critics from the side of opposition in their countries. As I have proven with the examples of Kosovo, Balkan, first America took over, bombed it. On the long run, it's better that UN peacekeeping forces can provide stability. Example of Haiti proves the same. That's why I beg you, if you vote for stability, vote for our proposal.
Thank you very much. I now call on Primoz Kana to open for the opposition team.
The opposition clearly stands on the side of the principles of responsibility and of efficiency. What we are going to prove is we are not going to be able to achieve stability by the plan of the government, and that the United Nations, first of all, should solve the problem by itself, and second of all, that can solve it better by itself than by United Nations troops. And that's why I would first of all like to focus on what I will provide as the leader of the opposition on the opposition side as being the ground of the debate, on the point of responsibility and on the point of decreasing efficiency by implementing the plan of the government. So first of all, let's talk about the responsibility and why the United States should solve the problem on itself and with the coalition of willingness that has been signed with the United States. First of all, the main reason is that Iraq was invaded without the authorization of the United Nations Security Council. And that was a clear violation of the international law. That clearly shows that the United Nations should not authorize any action of UN troops in a case of Iraq, since the United Nations has been standing against the military intervention of Iraq, and it would be against the good principles and good intentions of the United Nations to do something like that, and it was actually decrease the good image of the United Nations. Second of all, what the United States have to do is to do the dirty job alone. Seems to be quite selfish, but it's actually true that when somebody does something, in this case the sovereign state of the United States, violating the international law, what they have to do is actually to improve this, to do the dirty job alone, to do something what they claim would increase stability with UN troops. No, thank you. And let's talk also why the responsibility should not fall on the side of the United Nations, because it would have a bad impact on the image of the United Nations for two basic reasons. First of all, because it would mean solving problems caused by unauthorized action that hasn't been authorized by the United Nations Security Council. So it has been a clear violation of international law, a clear violation on principles that countries have agreed upon when ratifying the Charter and all the other important multilateral treaties. And second of all, what it would have a bad impact on the image of the United Nations, because it would mean that the United Nations, what it's actually doing is serving the interest of the United States. And that's actually what the United Nations doesn't want to do. Because what would that mean? It would be perceived that the United States can influence the United Nations in such a way that the United Nations would act only in the sole interest of the United States. And would you agree, closing speaker of the government, that that would have a bad impact on the image of the United Nations?
No, actually, to go back onto your previous point, on the point of principle, you would deny capabilities and a good plan simply because, no, clean up your own mess. Is that your line?
Thank you for leading me to the next point of the opposition, that is decreasing efficiency and why the United States should clear the mess by themselves. First of all, there is a problem of the unity of command. Well, it's quite clear, as has been already also stated by Javier Solana, that the unity of command is one of the basics for efficiency of any type of military action. And what would mean the implementation of the plan of the government is shifting the command. And not even shifting, but also gradually shifting, what would clearly cause a mess. Who will be responsible in a certain time? Who will do some jobs? Who will have the command? What will be the troops actually able to do? And it will be very much like in the old socialist system, when there has been collective responsibility. Well, all have been blamed to be responsible, but nobody actually took the responsibility. And that will be the case of the United States and United Nations having at the same time in Iraq. No, thank you. Then the next problem are the multinational troops that many times have been ineffective, as clearly showed the case of Srebrenica. What has been done due to many administrative reasons, due to many hesitation of the people in the United Nations, sleeping and not during the night, providing a clear incentive for Dutch troops to rescue the people that have been killed, that clearly shows that the United Nations troops, with such an unclear mandate as it would be in the case of Iraq, would done it by far worse than the United States. the next thing, why it will be better, the United States will solve it. No, thank you. Because the United States military budget is a couple of times bigger than the budget of the United Nations. And that goes in the line with the fact that it will be by far the biggest peacekeeping, no, thank you, peacekeeping cooperation of the United Nations. Since there has been, for example, no, thank you, East Timor, Cyprus, Liberia, Bosnia, this has been a couple of thousand or a couple of 10,000 soldiers in one place. And first of all, not in the whole country, not in such a big country as is Iraq. And second of all, it would not be possible to, no thank you, the United Nations do not have the knowledge to supervise the multinational group of such an amount and number as it is, at least 200,000 be needed. So let's go on through these principles of responsibility and efficiency. Let's take a look at the plan presented by the first speaker. First of all, they are saying, well, Americans are moving targets. Well, in fact, what they are doing, they are making the United Nations troops also the moving targets. Then second of all, the number of victims is increasing. What they don't see is especially the northern region where the Kurds live, that is increasingly stable, where the United States have been able to provide stability. Then on the point of UN troops, I have said 200,000 UN troops is something that the United Nations will not be able to do organizationally, logistically, and also with no political will. And then they say it will be a gradual approach. First of all, what we need to have here from Urshka is how it will be gradual, who will be commanding, and how actually it's going to be done. Because what the United States has never done in past, it has been that never in the past have been some United States troop under a foreign command. And what the United States would like to do is having UN command and United States troops, and on the other side, what the United Nations would like to do is having no command but some troops there. So it doesn't fit also with the reality. And as I said, it will worsen the image of the United Nations. And also on the point of example, they will be tackled more the cause of example by the second speaker of the opposition. And to once again point out what we are standing for. Point of responsibility, point of efficiency, provided by the United States troops, and that's how we will achieve the stability that we all would like to achieve in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Urshka to continue the case for the proposition.
It's the guns, but thanks anyway.
Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for opening up this wonderful debate for us. It's very interesting. Firstly, in my speech, I will rebut what Sonček said. Secondly, I will reaffirm my partner's argument. So to get straight to the point of responsibility. Maybe you haven't been listening, but exactly the point in our plan where we make the United States bear the cost of this mission is the point where we make them responsible for their actions. What we are saying, we do not agree with the illegitimate, yes, we agree it was illegitimate invasion of Iraq, but what we think, we disagree with the part where you say that the U.S. needs to do the dirty job alone, because what you are forgetting is the fact that this, what you call dirty job, involves Iraqi people. Those are the people who have already suffered. In 3 cases, they have suffered under the oppression of Saddam Hussein, under former oppressive regimes. They have secondly suffered from the invasion of the United States, which was illegitimate. And thirdly, they are now suffering from the instability in the region, from the terrorist attack, from the conflicts still going on. Because what really most of the people in Iraq really want is to live in peace, to have a stable country. Yes, Sonček.
United Nations troops will have to do the same as the US troops in order to provide stability. That will clearly damage the image and also endanger lives of these multinational troops there.
No, that is where you're wrong, because the United Nations will not be working there in their self-interest. They will be working for the cause of providing stability and security for the people in the Iraqi region. That is exactly what will improve the image of the United Nations, and that was our point, our argument of legitimacy. That was the argument that this will finally make this right. This will finally portray that unilateral action is wrong and that only an action that is agreed upon in the entire international community to do something good, not to do something out of self-interest, only that kind of action is guaranteed. To cover all your practical points that you mentioned about the 200,000 soldiers, we told you that this would be a gradual step. That we would firstly, we would put some amount of soldiers, they would join the command of the United States and gradually be taking over the place. These are practical issues. Already when we have conflicts going on, the United Nations, when they go into the country, they join the people that are already fighting there, that are already in conflicts, and that have to make some kind of organization, and they have a long history of doing this. No thank you vote. We have seen United Nations prove to be effective. We have seen that done in the example of East Timor. We have seen that the peacekeeping that is still going on in Bosnia and Kosovo, the peacekeeping I'm talking about, because that is still an unstable region, and that is exactly what they would be doing in this case. No thank you. And the thing that is making this unstable are exactly the Americans. The side of the opposition has completely ignored the problem that we have stated, the problem that Iraq has become a terrorist park, an open season hunt for Americans. The terrorists would not be there if Americans would not be there, because there is so much resentment at the United States as being an aggressive country for its foreign policy in the Muslim world. That is why all of those terrorist actions on the U.S. soldiers are happening. Yes?
How would you commend the fact that there can be terrorist attacks against UN personnel in Iraq? Thank you.
That is probably because it was United States soldiers working under United Nations command, sir. But what we are saying is that United Nations has the means to provide the troops and the soldiers from countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, which don't have budgets to finance their soldiers, but actually can improve, can have a lot of people who are unemployed and can be sent to those missions. They can provide the people, they cannot provide the funding, but the United States can and must, because it must take responsibility for its illegitimate actions. No. Now, the example of Srebrenica is a completely not valid comparison, because that was a place where the war has just broken out. Iraq is a country which is already in some kind of process of stabilization, but where we are claiming on the side of the government is that Americans are the ones who are making this impossible. Yes?
As you said by your own words, it is in the process of stabilization, and that's exactly what the opposition claims.
Yes, but stabilization will never occur so long as the Americans are there, so long as there is resentment against them, within the people, a resentment that they are an aggressor, a country that invaded their country, whereas the United Nations troops would be there to actually stabilize, to help them resolve their conflicts, and would not be there out of self-interest, out of invading them, and that could also be the second problem of terrorism, as I have already said. Now, we have seen many United States failures, not only as a part of their aggressive policy, but like atrocities done in prisons, like for example Abu Ghraib, or also in Afghanistan or Guantanamo, where United States troops have proven to have no heart for the people, to show them only cruelty. And this is where we claim that United Nations are different, because they have more control. You also have, they have more control to control their soldiers. No, thank you, both of you. They have observers that report, they have people that report to the soldiers' command and do enforce judicial sanctions if the soldiers do something wrong. So there is more control within the United Nations to do, and they have more heart, because they are there to keep the peace, not to keep the oil. Now, the criteria, the critical point in this debate is basically the question, which side makes Iraq more stable? What we are claiming is if in 50 years' time, for example, with our plan, if we manage to make Iraq a stable state with our action, then we actually do fulfill this criterion, and this is why we, the first government, should win this debate. For all the reasons I have stated, for the support of the local population, of the UN troops, for decrease of terrorist acts, for the fact that United Nations is the best for the job for the question of legitimacy, that we finally make this right. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Ivan Velov to continue the debate for the opposition team.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, the plan that our government is proposing cannot work. The plan that our government is proposing will not work. And the plan that our government is proposing should not be allowed to work. Now I'll try to tell you why. Firstly, on the question of responsibility, what our government was actually stating through all the examples of Haiti, of Kosovo, and of Iraq, it was that it is okay for the US to do whatever they want, wherever they want, and after that, let the dirty job for the UN. Sorry, we do not agree. It is high time that the USA took up the responsibility for their actions. Otherwise, what actually our opponents are stating, that it is okay if they do it in future, and we do not agree with that. We believe it has been enough up to now. The second thing, why it will not happen. Firstly, we clearly stated tonight that USA will not allow its forces to serve under UN command. They've never done so. And as our opponents stated, there will be a time in their plan while the command of the the forces in Iraq will be divided between UN and US. In other words, they want, at a certain point, US soldiers to serve under joint UN command, something that has never been done. They didn't tell you why they think the USA will agree with such a thing. The next thing, about the budget. Dear ladies and gentlemen, a budget of an army is not only the cost for a certain operation. And Primož said that the US military budget is greater than the UN, also actually the biggest budget in the world. That also means that the US soldiers are the best equipped and the best trained for any kind of mission. You cannot just go to Pakistan, gather several thousands of people and send them to Iraq and say you're going to be peacekeepers. Sorry, that doesn't work. These people have to be trained to work with the technology provided. These people have to be trained how to be soldiers. And we don't believe that neither Pakistan nor Bangladesh can do it better than the USA. That is why if you're going to send Bangladesh and Pakistan soldiers instead of the US, you're going to weaken the peacekeeping operation and destabilize Iraq tonight. Now, the next thing, about resentment against the US forces. Firstly, we do not believe that the UN will be greeted with open hands in Iraq as our opponents were trying to convince us. I'll try to remind my dear opponent on the side of the first government that on the very first day of the Iraqi occupation there was a terrorist attack not against US personnel under the UN, against the UN headquarters in Baghdad. And the UN High Representative in Iraq was killed. He was not an American, my dear lady. He was a Frenchman.
Point, sir.
Denied, lady. So we still lack the proof that UN forces will be accepted in Iraq. Having in mind that it is not only American soldiers that are dying right now in the coalition. You have Bulgarians dying. You have Filipinos dying. You have Polish dying there. And it seems to us that the terrorists do not discriminate who is an American and who is not. And I would very much like to hear from the second government how they will prove us that the terrorists will make the difference between international forces under the coalition of the willing and international forces under the UN command. That would be interesting. Now, the next thing about the UN effectivity. According to our opponents, the UN is the most effective peacekeeper in the world.
On efficiency.
Yes, sir.
So basically, on the side of the opposition, you're stating that U.S. in Iraq so far is extremely efficient and should be allowed to work out
Thank
their
you for this comment. Thank you for this question. What we are stating is that up to now the U.S. is efficient enough, and UN will be less efficient than the USA. which is actually why we should not allow the UN to deny. Now, I was talking about the UN efficiency. Firstly, we do not believe that examples of Kosovo and what was the other one in Srebrenica, I believe, are really examples of UN effectively doing the job after the US, because in Kosovo we also have ethnic cleansing, this time against the Serbs, not against the Albanians. So what the UN actually did, they reversed the side that is doing ethnic cleansing, but they didn't solve the problem. Also, we have the fact that no matter what the good intentions of the UN, supposed by the government, although we have the example of UN doing atrocities in Congo under their peacekeeping mission, you have the opinion of the High Commissioner on Security for the European Union, Mr. Javier Solana, who says, not exactly like Primož put it, his words are that there is no substitute for the unity of command in a state of crisis. I believe we all agree that Iraq is still in a state of crisis. And you cannot substitute the American unity of command with all the good intentions of the UN and of Pakistani and Bangladeshi soldiers. Now, last but not least, about the UN, about the US paying for the operation in UN. According to our opponent, by removing the US soldiers and letting the US only pay the money, we are actually increasing their responsibility. Well, actually, right now, the US is paying and is sending their soldiers. So by relieving them from their soldiers, how come you give them greater responsibility? That was really not well explained. Also, on the point of the situation on the situation of Iraq, my colleague already stated that this situation is improving, especially in the Kurdish region. Then I would like to state that if you replace the US with UN, you slow the improvement. At least because then the US companies, which are now heavily investing in Iraq, will most likely stop to do so. I mean, right now they have the interest to invest in a country where their government is trying to stabilize. If you remove the stabilization, if you remove the US forces, then effectively you remove the US investment and you slow down the development of Iraqi economy, which is not quite stabilizing, my dear government. So, as I said, this plan cannot work because the UN is less efficient than the US, although maybe more legitimate, but less efficient. And we should not allow this plan to work because that would mean relieving the US from their responsibility, which is not right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now return to the proposition, and I call on the first speaker of the second team, Spela, to
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome for the first time in the second half of the table of today's debate. I would like to start my speech to refer to a sentence of the second speaker of the government when he said that US will never allow their soldiers to be under UN command, that US will never go out of Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, US troops will certainly sooner or later go out of Iraq because the public opinion in the US is so much against their soldiers staying in Iraq that the government will have actually to actually pull out the troops of Iraq, and the opposition today is asking what will happen then. What will happen if we do not replace US soldiers with UN soldiers and just pull the US soldiers out? Then we will certainly have another revolution or civil war or whatever, and we simply cannot allow that, and that is why we have to take the responsibility today and give UN peacekeeping missions into Iraq instead of US soldiers. I will firstly go through the points that were raised by the first half of the table and then go to the extension of the second proposition. Firstly, the issue of responsibility. As have been claimed through the on the first half of the table, US is taking responsibility by paying for the actions, and that is another responsibility they're taking. If we are saying that U.S. should do the dirty job alone, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that maybe this invasion was not legitimate. But what the UN now is not allowed to do is playing an insulted institutions that does not want to go and solve the conflict they should solve now.
Point.
Yes.
Under this plan, the United Nations might be willingly to go, but the United States will not be willingly to go. So there's core of the problem.
Sir, it is just what I explained at the right beginning of my speech. The U.S. government will have to pull their troops out because the public opinion is so much against their troops staying in Iraq. Now let me go back to who is doing the dirty job and why the UN has to take the responsibility. UN has to take responsibility because, firstly, even if it was not a legitimate invasion, we have the status quo today. We don't have a time machine to go back. And on the status quo, on today's situation, the best thing we can do is send UN troops instead of US troops into Iraq. No, thank you. And the image of the UN won't suffer by that because simply we know that they did not support, but now they're trying to help to establish democracy. And the standpoint of the United Nations will remain clear as it is clear today. Going to the next point of the UN or US troops being moving targets. As we have explained, as has been explained at the first half of the table, the US are actually moving targets, and as we know, the number of dead soldiers are increasing daily. We have one example from the side of the opposition of some attacks against the UN. But ladies and gentlemen, we have daily attacks versus one attack, and this daily attacks cost much more life than this one attack, and that is another reason why we have to actually get UN troops in and US troops out. And the next thing, I would like to stress before I go to the extension of today's second proposition is firstly that what the opposition has been asking about how will we do it, will it be done, who will take the command during all these things will be done. Firstly, it was clearly stated by the proposition that we will not make this overnight. It will happen gradually, and if it happens gradually, then troops can be trained to do this.
That point.
I'll just finish my point and then I'll take your point. So firstly, the UN will have time to train troops and then send them in and actually make them more efficient as the US troops.
The government keeps using this generic term gradually and not overnight. What does gradually mean? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Gradually means as much time as we need, that there won't be any bad consequences of the US pullout and of the US pull-in, or however we may say. And you're actually just talking about technicalities here. What we're giving you are the important reasons of why the US troops should pull out and the UN troops should go in. And ladies and gentlemen, if we have such if we have such an important reasons, then the UN and the US will have to find a solution how this process will actually take place. Maybe it will take 1 year, maybe 2 years, but it certainly will take place. Yeah.
Why are you quoting President Bush, who says that the U.S. forces will stay as long as needed in Iraq?
I'm saying that the U.S. forces will stay as long as needed, that the UN forces can come in. And that is the only thing I'm saying. It has nothing to do with President Bush. And now let me go to my extension, or the extension of the second proposition. The first half of the table has presented a plan where we actually send UN troops in and pull US troops out. And what the second half of the proposition today is seeing as a major part of the plan is that we send in troops who possess the local know-how and who have the regional sensibility. That means that the countries from the Middle East, that means that the countries who actually know how Iraqi functions, that are countries which maybe also the Iraqi people would trust more and therefore cooperate more. And now, let me go to actually the positive consequences that we have from this, from actually troops with the local know-how going into Iraq. Firstly, the lack of cooperation of the Iraqi people not wanting to actually taking part in the process of democratization is actually saying no to Western imperialism, saying no to US troops, saying no, you will not be here and tell us what to do. But if we have soldiers that come from neighboring countries, soldiers that come from the region, then this will actually see this is not Western imperialism, that is something that is really good for us, and that is what also others want, not only the US, who probably would like to have our oil. And the second consequence is that we know that insurgencies in Iraq are not because of the new Iraq, but because of the U.S. presence, which has been already clearly stated. But what we have here, if we actually pull U.S. troops out and give UN troops in, is that firstly, that insurgencies will decrease against U.S. vehicles, buildings, occupying forces, against the personnel, and what this leads us to, ladies and gentlemen, is that the number of insurgencies will decrease, and what this also leads us to is that we will need less soldiers, which is answering the point of the first speaker of the opposition that he was giving to the first half of the table. If we don't have so many insurgencies, if the situation is improving so dramatically, then we do not need 200,000 soldiers. And because of all these reasons, because also the opposition is saying that the UN is more legitimate to go in, because we know that the stability will increase, that emergencies will decrease, because of all these reasons, today the second half of the table, I believe, has clearly showed you why we have to vote in favor of the proposition.
Thank you very much. Returning to the opposition, I call on the first speaker of the second opposition team, Jake, to continue with their
I'd like to thank everyone, including my cheerleading squad over there, for giving me the support I need. And I'd like to thank the country of Slovenia and the Academy for humbling me with the experience of the International Debate Forum. I'm honored to be here standing and speaking to everyone. Now, I'm going to say three specific things. First, I'm going to talk about why U.S. involvement and its responsibility for the United States, that we need U.S. troops to increase U.S. responsibility so this doesn't happen again, and why replacing U.S. coffins with UN coffins does not solve the problem. Now, secondly, I will make the argument attacking the extension of the second government team that by making the conflict localized, it only makes the conflict worse and brings in ethnic and religious ties that will only increase instability. Now, lastly, I will state that it is infeasible for the UN to even gradually, whatever that means, enter the Iraq government. And lastly, that national interest for oil within the UN will lead to Iraq being carved up like a Christmas ham. Now, let's talk about U.S. responsibility. The government is under the assumption that U.S. responsibility means footing the bill for UN troops. That is illegitimate for the first reason is that U.S. soldiers need to be there because it keeps the U.S. population involved in the event. The second government speaker is right that the U.S. population, not at this time, the U.S. people are angry at Iraq because we are losing soldiers, because we are involved in that area. If we send the message that it is okay for you to hostily take over a government as long as you're willing to pay the bill for it later, that is the most illegitimate use of power and is only a way which rich countries will be able to exploit poorer countries. Wouldn't you agree?
What is the opposition's plan in the change of elections in U.S. if the next president decides to pull out all the troops from Iraq? What are you going to do? Thank you.
Well, I could also talk about what would happen if a helicopter came down and hit this art gallery. I'm not going to work in the idea of possibilities. I'm going to talk about the actual facts because that's all I have to work with. Unless I'm a mind reader, but I'm not, unfortunately. Now, let's also talk about UN troops and why they're ineffective. Now, the second government speaker is right to ignore the arguments by the first opposition team that UN troops are ineffective as establishing any sort of peace. This can be seen in an election event in Cambodia in 1993, where they were barely able to get an election process going, but then afterwards, the leader who was denied the vote just took over the government all over again, and the peacekeepers did nothing to stop him. Would the same thing happen if a Sunni or Shiite majority took over the government if they did not agree with the elections? I think so. And also, no U.S. leader will work with UN troops because they don't believe in the effectiveness of the UN policy. So what the government would have you believe is that you have an Iranian general tell another, I guess, a Turkey soldier that they have to commit an event to an Israeli other troop. That just leads to inefficient government use and doesn't have a solidified, unified strategy that the United States have. Now, let's talk about the extension. Localized conflicts. Now, they want to say that they want to bring in people that have experience, that have knowledge about the area. But that seems to me to only be an excuse to bring in people that have a problem with the current area, to bring in religious groups that that might have a problem with what is going on in the area and might use it as a way to inject their own agenda. That's why that's a violation of UN policy. UN peacekeepers generally do not come from regions that are close to conflict areas because these same problems can occur. So I guess the second government extension is to change UN policy to allow that to happen. I don't know, are they changing UN policy or are they just contradicting everything UN peacekeepers have done for the last 25 years? I hope the last speaker explains it for me. Now, also I'd like to say the point that they don't explain what these sort of localized conflicts would be or who these people would be. Would that be to allow Israeli troops into Iraq because they have a localized knowledge of Middle Eastern affairs? That would seem to anger all the Arabs in Iraq who wouldn't want any Israeli Jewish troops involved in that area. Wouldn't you agree?
No. What I would like to point out here that on the long run, only UN can provide stability for the region, as we proved in the case of Balkans and in the case of Haiti.
Sure, they can provide stability agents for small other areas, but that's not answering my key point, which is that Iraq is a destabilized region, that the U.S. needs to take responsibility, and that there are other interests involved. Now you had your chance. That there are other interests involved that will take place, which leads me into my next point, which is oil interest. Now let's not forget that Iraq is an oil-rich country, and that many people make the legitimate argument that the U.S. went into Iraq to secure its oil fields. Now, the UN is made up of several different nations, and for the UN to gradually go in, whatever that means, to the Iraq, it would have to actually pass through the General Assembly and the Security Council. Who's on the Security Council? China. China wants oil for its energy resources. Who else is on the Security Council? France. France wants energy oil, cheap oil. So what will happen is you'll have many different groups fighting over the oil interests of Iraq. That is what the U.S. responsibility is solely lie. They might talk about Halliburton and how it has a monopoly, but a monopoly, no. A monopoly is needed in the oil interest to stop Iraq being carved up by multinational corporations. This can be seen with Shell Oil and Unocal and the fight they had over Nigeria, where they just carved the country up and supported human rights abuses in every arena that made Iraq seem like a Christmas party. It just seems like ridiculous for me to accept that, to allow multinational corporations from other governments in just because you don't like the U.S. ones. Now, also I'd like to talk about feasibility. The U.S. is on the Security Council. The U.S. does not want UN troops in there. They would veto the bill. Also, it would require the Security Council and the General Assembly to make a vote to promote peacekeepers into that region. Nations like France, who have never agreed that Iraq is good, would automatically veto this bill, and they are not making any reason on why the General Assembly would accept any of those reasons. So UN would never make that gradual process, nor can they explain what that gradual process is, making it even harder for nations to be able to respond or even vote for a policy when they don't know how many troops they'll commit, what kind of troop engagement that will be, and what sort of time period that is. These are the same arguments that U.S. citizens are using against the Bush administration with his policy of not having a specific deadline. So, for these reasons, because the U.S. needs to finally take responsibilities for their actions, because it stops another example of us invading another country for our own selfish interests, because if you increase localized conflicts, it both violates UN policy and doctrine, and it only increases the ability for ethnic populations and religious minorities to gain a foothold and actually destabilize the region, and finally, because it will only lead to oil interests for other national governments to conflict in different areas, increasing instability, and finally, because it is infeasible for the UN to even make an agreement on what the definition of terrorism is, let alone to enter troops into Iraq. You must throw out this plan. Thank you.
I call on the final speaker of the second team, Speller.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to be a closing speaker in the final debate for the first time in my debating career. So I'll try to do as good of a job as I possibly can. Firstly, I would like to outline my speech, which will firstly be on a thematic scheme. We will discuss the themes that have created, such as U.S. responsibility, efficiency of UN troops, oil, that was brought out by the second opposition, and on the arguments on the side of the government, such as our local issues and the fact that the U.S. needs to take responsibility. Firstly, to go on to what seems to be the point in the speech of the first government and also the second government is that U.S. screwed up in Iraq and it needs to take responsibility. But what it is doing now, it is harming Iraqi people, it is harming U.S. people, U.S. troops in Iraq, and it is also harming any sort of credibility they have in the international arena. So on the point of U.S. responsibility, we think that it is high time they get the hell out of Iraq, let UN troops, with far more local sensitivity, take over, help the region, stay in the region, ladies and gentlemen, and this is the point I must stress, and I shall return to slightly later in this part of my speech. And also, it is high time, it is, as we agree with the first government, and it is a great case, is U.S. should keep paying for the UN forces in Iraq. This leads me greatly to the next point in the general debate, which was efficiency of UN troops versus efficiency of US troops. Ladies and gentlemen, the efficiency of US troops is based mostly on the enormous budget that they have. They are basically having a lot of technology. Yes, thank you, Jake.
Isn't it not just based on enormous budget, but they all speak the same language, have been trained the same exact way?
Thank you, but as we pointed out on the governmental side, on the examples of Bosnia and Haiti, these were coalitions of military forces under UN umbrella, which had very little or absolutely no, it wasn't contradicted by the opposition, any logistical problems in creating that and keeping to command. No, thank you. To move back to the efficiency argument, is they have local knowledge, as was presented by my debate partner. They have local knowledge, they have local sensitivity. And, and on the fact of efficiency, we have to look at how few of them are actually going to die. By this day, 2,000 American troops have died. What we're arguing on the side of the governmental side is the fact that they're dying because they're U.S. troops. If regional troops would come in, there would be far less resistance to U.S. imperialism. Yes, Simon?
Actually, it is not violence against Americans. It is violence against every foreign intruder in the country. And if that intruder comes from a neighboring country with which Iraq was in war 10 years ago, it will be even worse.
Thank you. No, this is, as Zarqawi has stated, as all insurgents have stated, this is an exact attack on U.S. forces, on Western imperialism in Iraq. Also, to move on slightly on the debate, on the, one of the great arguments on the side of the government was absolutely not negated. Jake basically said, no, I'm not a mind reader, is the possibility of a change of mentality in the U.S. Ladies and gentlemen, the side of the opposition merely suggests that Republicans will stay in government in the U.S. for the next 20 years, and Republicans will want to keep U.S. troops dying there, unnecessarily dying greater numbers than UN troops would be dying. Just simply, no, thank you. Simply because they don't want to give us the argument of feasibility of that, the fact that the public opinion will actually force the U.S. leaders to change their mind, which has happened in Vietnam and in other cases. So, ladies and gentlemen, the opposition is basically saying, don't take the plan of the governmental side because, well, it's not a problem. U.S. will keep staying there and keep cleaning up the mess that they make. On the oil interest that Jake brought in, he claims that if UN countries, more than one, which is US country, comes in, basically the oil will be carved up and divided by these countries, and it will be a feeding ground for countries that come in. What the point is missing, Jake, is that, yeah, this is happening right now, but only by one country, by US. US is not feeding the profits of the Iraqi oil right now, wouldn't you?
What is the better of Iraq being carved up by several countries than being carved up by one?
On the point that if several countries came in, and if you would have, maybe I was timing your question slightly wrong. What we're trying to make on the side of the government is that UN troops have far more local sensitivity. They will have by being funded through US budget, they will not need their oil revenues to fund their own budget. So basically what we're saying on the governmental side is that it's better to have transparency, to have UN in control
charge of the Iraqi oil than to have U.S. fairly coming in, pumping all the oil revenues into their own coffers and staying there with this on the side of the government. The oil issue is clearly not well represented by the opposition because basically, no, Jake, you had your chance, you didn't do it. The oil interest is the biggest interest why U.S. is in Iraq. They are there to pump oil, and on the side of the opposition, which was very well presented by my first speaker, that is the problem. We see the problem of exploitation. And also, to sum up on the side of the government, on the benefits of the governmental plannings. Firstly, much fewer troops will be needed because of decrease in insurgency, because in decrease hate of U.S. Western imperialism. The budget by decreasing the number of troops, the budget will decrease, and also the budget will be funded by the U.S., so the countries will have absolutely no pretext as to saying we need the oil revenues that we are going to protect in Iraq. Basically, they will have to give it through a transparent system through the UN transparent system. And also, simply to go on the fact that it would be beneficial both for Iraq and the U.S. Ladies and gentlemen, what the opposition is failing to see and what the governmental side has very clearly shown is that U.S. involvement in Iraq is hampering U.S. public opinion, U.S. public domestic opinion for their leader, which is President Bush, for the people of Iraq, because they're basically hurting far more on innocent attacks, on bombs that were planted for American troops, and also on the fact that the basic credibility of a country in international relations is also judged by accepting that you've made a mistake, by pulling out and actually letting someone far better equipped to deal with the problem in and owing up to your mistakes and footing the bill for your mistake. So thank you, and I beg you to propose for the governmental side.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, to close for the opposition side, and indeed to close the whole debate, I call on the final speaker, Simon.
I've never had so...
I'm sorry, I obviously prejudged the camera.
No, that's all right. We need this kid money.
Sorry. Smile with the budget from this.
There's always money somewhere.
I welcome the final speaker, Simon.
Never in my debating career have I had so many different points to talk about, so many important points, so you'll have to forgive me for skipping the rhetoric introduction in which I would greet everyone from my family to the King of Norway and go right down to the business. I'm going to talk about responsibility and how this plan justifies every invasion of a sovereign country contrary to international law. I'm going to talk about the fact that the plan is not feasible and will not be implemented. I'm going to talk about the issue of the violence against foreign troops, which is understood completely wrongly by the government in this debate. I'm going to talk about the effectivity of different solutions for this problem, namely US troops versus UN troops. I'm going to talk about the extension presented by the government, and finally about oil, which seems to be included in every debate about Iraq. By the plan that the government proposes in this debate, and now I'm summing up the argument that went through the whole opposition line, we are sending the wrong message. We are basically polluting the future of the world with the fact that every country in the world will be able to invade any country of their choice, and when they will run out of breath, they're going to simply be able to say, okay, dear UN, now it's your time to clean the mess after us. This is wrong logic. We do not wish that logic to be followed, because this basically only increases the chances for future military conflicts in the world, and this is not something that the opposition in this debate would like to have. No spiela. Furthermore, and that argument was dropped by the government as the debate went by. Yes.
But you are forgetting that the terrorist actions against Americans are also hurting the Iraqi people and destabilizing Iraq.
I'll get to the issue of Iraq being destabilized and in danger a bit later when I'm going to explain to you why US troops are better in dealing with this situation. But what I was talking about right now is the issue of the credibility of the United Nations. They've been fighting for international law for the past few years. They were virtually the only player in the international arena that was fighting for that. So I, as a lawyer, am shocked that you want to kill the only legitimate force in the world that is fighting for justice in the international field, if you want me to put it that way. And they would also go against their own decisions from the past, which would destroy the credibility of the United Nations and make it an obsolete organization. Now on to the feasibility. I've got three things that I want to say here. First of all, the USA, especially with regard to the issue of Iraq, have constantly expressed opinions that are contrary to any kind of UN involvement in the issue. And the government never provided us any reason as to why they want us to think that something has changed in the way that the USA are looking at this issue. For example, the sole fact that John Bolton is now the US representative to the United Nations kind of proves their attitude to the United Nations, and the fact that they don't want to cooperate with them at all. Now they come up with the argument, they say that it's a policy of the United States that they take foreign troops and then pay for the peacekeeping missions that they carry out and so keep themselves involved. But that is wrong in this case, because they only do that in cases when peacekeeping missions by the UN would not violate their interest in this field. And in this particular case, the UN troops in Iraq would most certainly violate US interests, which are to stay in the region and take care of the problems. And this has been stated by the US Army officials, by the US Army officials and by the US politicians, and nobody so far has convinced me of the opposite, that the opinions have changed. So. The next point that they want you, dear judges, to believe is that the U.S. Army will have to be pulled out because the public opinion in the United States is for it. But that is not this reason that basically does not lead to the consequence that they want us to accept, because the U.S. politicians have stated very clearly that they want to stay in Iraq and sort out the business, that they want to leave Iraq when it is a country that can take care of themselves. And they're doing that because they know that if they leave the conflicts unresolved, that is going to most certainly cripple their credibility in the international arena. But a bit later. Violence against foreign troops has become quite of an issue in the debate, and I've explained in my last POI that this is not violence against Americans, but that extremist Iraqi, probably Islamist fundamentalist groups have negative feelings towards any invader into the country of Iraq, and that the situation would most certainly not change if you replace Americans by other foreigners, especially if those foreigners come from the same region with which Iraqis have had open conflicts in the past, and I'll get to the problems with that a bit later. The next thing is the effectivity. First of all, the UN can never get 200,000 troops together to equip
I'm
this
not one of
military
them,
operations.
sir.
No, and this means that all examples that the government has talked to you about of previous successful peacekeeping missions, those examples are irrelevant because there were a few thousand soldiers, which means that this is a totally different strategical and logistical project. Further on, US troops are better equipped. They have the intelligence support. We've heard all of that. And most importantly, probably, they've got a unified decision-making process, don't they?
If US forces are so well equipped, so well trained, why can't they handle the situation?
Because the situation in Iraq is pretty bad at the moment. What we're trying to tell you is that the US troops, is not that US troops are perfect, but that they are most certainly better than the UN troops that the government is proposing. So the next thing is extension, which shows clear misunderstanding of the UN policies as to peacekeeping operations. The UN would never send troops into a country that have any kind of involvement into the conflicts from before. They will never send troops that come from the region in which the tensions have arisen, especially if they know that this is simply going to fuel all the disagreements, and that this is simply going to increase the violence against foreign invaders, because I'm pretty sure that fundamentalist Iraqi groups wouldn't really mind killing Iranians instead of Americans, because they don't seem to be at good terms with any of them. The last point that I want to talk about is the oil issues. The most important argument that my team wishes to make in this bill is that basically oil interests are going to cripple the decision-making process in this field, that all positive, productive missions in the field by the UN troops are going to be depending on the current economic interests of the powers that are going to sit in the Security Council. We've got quite diverse members of the Security Council at the moment. Some of them seem to have veto power. And what we want you to believe is that their interests are going to lead to no good decisions, because they're going to contradict themselves. At the moment, the USA might be taking all the oil, but at least they're having a clear strategy as to how to combat the security issues in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The judging panel will now withdraw to consider its decision, so please talk amongst yourselves.
Tension is palpable in the crowd. Well, we can talk to them afterwards. Let's let him make the decision, and then we can all just do our little individual discussion.
Any kind of like stuff you'd like me to just say is I'm going to say something. Yeah, I'm going to say some stuff about factors for the team.
Okay, does he want us to talk, or does he want us to get the hell out of here?
I'm not going to be long.
Okay. Wave to the camera.
I'm going to give basic business stuff as
okay.
discussed there. Is that okay?
Fair enough. The slackers are holding us up. John, smile to the camera.
Oh, Jason, I was just evaluating you. So
well, thank God. Okay, don't say things that are too bad. I don't want my boss getting mad.
You like the debate, Jason?
Thought it was a pretty reasonable debate. I'm tired of hearing people trash my country and my people, but
Jake was
I mean, right? I know, right. Jake was doing it for us, so I don't know.
Sorry, I couldn't take as a judge on that debate.
Well,
I'd be interested in hearing your feedback and arguing with you on the feedback.
Well, you can argue with me on this decision.
We might have to, Jason.
Well, you might want to.
You're sitting in your decision.
I'm not revealing my decision to you. Of course, if you already know the answer, then you don't have to argue.
So you're conceding that this is the answer.
I'm conceding that you don't want to deal with me because I'm too much for you to handle.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
You want to settle this man-to-man over a debate?
Man to man. How about person to person?
Man-to-man.
Carry the primeval bull deep into the bowels of the earth and slaughter him, so that from its blood he should create all the life on the earth. So the legionnaires' soldiers.
Ceremony. First, we would like to thank you to trainers who came here to train debaters and share their debate knowledge. They did this voluntarily, so they are paid for this for this job that they were doing here. So all we can do is thank them. We would like to thank you individually to the trainers. So Jure Požgan is here. Is not not anymore.
He really loves.
Okay, and Maja Nenadović. Loke Ving Fat. Sam Nelson. Sam Greenland. Jason Jarvis.
Disagree with you. Someone who's respectful enough to listen to your ideas. And maybe, just maybe, one of those two people will change their mind. This is the culture that I personally, sometimes it's hard to create. But it is created in the way you bond with each other, in the way you city, and indeed the productivity of disagreement. The world, as I've often said, is in a hell of a mess. How can I possibly make a difference? I'm just one person. I can't possibly do this, but each of you is a powerful being. And each of you, within the reach of your hands and the sound of your voice, can make the world different. You are guided by a fantastic mental mechanism. Your brain is a 5 billion cell reality generating device. It's the most powerful such device in the universe. Every one of us has it. And you can use that to imagine a better idea, to imagine a better future, even if it's just within the reach of your hand and the sound of your voice. And when there is a critical mass at any given point of powerful people with these ideas and these capacities who reach out and touch other people, they become empowered to think, to act. I don't need to tell you about stories in the news about people's revolutions, of people saying, we've had enough. Already, in the last 20 years, it's brought down the most powerful empires in history. And the other empires that need to come down maybe are not as clearly identified by walls or by tanks, but those empires and those tyrannies still exist. And when we have the chance to speak, when you have the chance to speak, to make a difference, I know you will. The debates we have set the stage. They are not what's really important. What the most important debate of your life is when you stand up on behalf of refugees, when you stand up on behalf of civil rights of people who aren't even in your family, when you stand up to save the natural world. That's the most important debate you're going to have. And a lot of your trainers will be much older when that important debate happens. But we may see you on a TV screen and go, International Debate Academy, Slovenia, 2005. This was easy. Now, and the training was easy, and training you was fun. Now, the hard work is all yours. And I know you're going to do a fantastic job. Thank you.
The next one, the fourth one next year again, because we think that that's what is needed. It came as an idea years ago when we found out that there is no university training in Europe, and that it's badly needed because except the tournaments there was nothing. It seems that it's proving that we were right. And I'm really very proud that we are doing that every year. I'm really, really very happy that so many people from all over the world are willing to come here to train you. And I need to finish with something that I think that I'm really, really very proud about Grega Primož and Simon, who did all the work. I didn't know. Academy being in this basically Primož's hometown in a way, though he's from one village here, he really make a lot of effort that the whole event will become a success. And I'm extremely grateful.
So Sam, the floor is yours to announce.
Okay, thank you very much. I promise I'll try to be brief. First of all, before I start, I would like to say on behalf of, again, on behalf of the trainers and purely on behalf of myself, thank you to all the debaters that I have watched, and I'm sure thank you to all the debaters that everybody else has watched, for two things. Firstly, for entertaining us, and I think as adjudicators, we all know that it is very easy to be bored during debates, and I think it's of a very high standard. Secondly, on our behalf, to say thank you today would not recognise some of the speakers that we saw on day one. And I hope that you yourselves would look at your performance today and will look at your performance on the first day of the Academy and hopefully not recognise yourselves either. I think virtually everybody I've seen has improved tremendously over the week, and that is due to your dedication, to your hard work and your willingness to put into practice the things that you have learned. So from us to you, thank you very much. Now, to business at hand. First of all, and it sounds like a platitude, but it is, in this particular instance, particularly true. Only 4 teams can make it to the final. And I think we all agree, the 7 judges, that the debate we saw today in the final was of very high quality. And I'd like to say now at the outset, we would like to thank all 4 teams in the tournament for their contribution to the debate today, for their contribution to the rest of the tournament, and to say that unfortunately we do have to rank them. But that is not to say that there is a large gap between the teams, and certainly it is not to say that any of them did not deserve their place here today. So I think it is quite clear that all 4 teams deserve to be here today. So before I give the rankings, we have one more round of applause for the 4 teams in the And now, before the sense of anticipation kills everybody, the results in order from 4th place to 1st place. As the judges, we have to look at 2 overall criteria, essentially. Which side of the debate has won the debate, and which team made the greatest contribution towards that result coming about. And as you all know, there are many different permutations of wins. Today, we felt that one side of the debate clearly came above the other. And so, with the results are that in 4th place goes the 2nd government team, and 3rd place goes the 1st. Overall, we felt that on the opposition there was collectively a greater amount of argumentation, a greater amount perhaps of analysis and rebuttal, and in particular a greater amounts of evidence and argumentation put forward in support of the position that they were holding. So the question that we had to come to as adjudicators is, of those 2 teams, which team made the greatest contribution to the opposition win? And which team essentially had enough control and enough influence throughout the debate to make that result come about. And so, without wishing to make it happen any longer, although I wanted to see how long that silence would last. 2nd place goes to the 1st opposition team. Teams to come to us if they would like feedback. We also appreciate that perhaps after a week of training, perhaps the last thing they want to do is have another conversation about debating. We will forgive you if you don't want to come, if that's just feedback. That applies obviously, of course, to all other students as well. If, we are still around for the rest of the day. If you would like to come and get feedback from us, from debates that are earlier today and so on, that you might not have had time to do, please feel free to come and do that. But from us, from the judges, thank you very much.